Join me as I tell you what is probably one of the most wild tank engagement stories from World War II. Imagine with me, if you will, that it's July 18th, 1944, a little over a month after the Allied invasions of Normandy that were often referred to as D-Day. Heavy fighting's happening in the whole area to try and maintain the Allied positions in France and to start pushing forward on the long road to Berlin. One of the major cities that had to be taken was Caen, C-A-E-N, and the fighting there would be some of the most significant for the Allies in the later part of World War II, especially for the British, as it was mainly a British operation. Germany, during this time and earlier in the war, had already fielded some very impressive equipment, and that while that equipment was often problematic for Germany, it could often give the Allies quite a rough time on the battlefield, and oftentimes was a bit of a morale damper for Allied troops. And during this time in France, rumors of a new German super tank, the Königstiger, or the King Tiger, circulated among Allied forces. These rumors of this new super tank circulated among the men that were under the command of a certain Irishman, Lieutenant John Reginald Gorman. As they were doing their duty in France and these rumors circulated, one of his men, Lance Corporal James Barron, asked Lieutenant Gorman what they would do if they met one of these fearsome rumored tanks. Lieutenant Gorman answered, "Use naval tactics. Our Shermans are faster, so if we meet one, we ram it." They were close to a village at this time named Cagney, and they were preparing to cross over a stream and a ridge and move towards the enemy. Lieutenant Gorman had 3 tanks under his command, and they were also there with several other forces as part of the operations around Caen. Unfortunately, Gorman's tank got stuck. After trying for some time to get the tank unstuck, Lieutenant Gorman made the decision to abandon it and took command of one of the other tanks under his command, named Ballyraggett, and they crossed over the stream and up the slope that was ahead of them. Unfortunately, they found that the rest of their comrades had moved on, and eventually him and the other tank of his unit that were still functioning crested a ridge as they drove along in the area around Cagney and found 4 German tanks just sitting in a field. A Panzer IV, a Panther, the feared Tiger I, and a King Tiger. Fairly quickly, although they did seem surprised, according to Lieutenant John Gorman, the German tanks noticed the 2 Shermans that had come into their field of view. Gorman gave the command to fire immediately, but the gun on the Ballyraggett jammed. The King Tiger began to bring its turret around and its gun around in order to deal with the new Shermans that had just appeared. However, it was at this time that Lieutenant Gorman gave the command to charge. Going down the slope very rapidly and picking up speed, Gorman's tank barreled towards this fearsome new King Tiger. The Ballyraggett struck the rear area of the King Tiger at a very high rate of speed, actually causing the 2 tanks to lock together and disabling them both. In the havoc of this horrible crash that had happened, where the Sherman had charged the King Tiger's crew actually abandoned the tank. However, the other 3 German tanks that were sitting there, turned to face the Sherman that was still sitting behind, that had not charged the King Tiger, and opened fire on it. They very quickly knocked out that Sherman, but while the 3 tanks were busy, that allowed Lieutenant Gorman and his crew to escape. They escaped, got away, some of the crew of the other tanks survived as well, and Lieutenant Gorman went back to Cagney. When he went to Cagney, he found there a Sherman Firefly, which was a Sherman that was equipped with a 17-pounder gun that was far more powerful than the guns the Sherman was normally equipped with, much better for dealing with armor. He found that the tank had been struck, that the crew had lost their gunner, and actually were kind of in shock. They were kind of trapped in the tank too by the body of their fallen comrade. So he helped him get out of the tank, helped calm him down a little bit, and then Lieutenant Gorman commandeered the Firefly and drove back to the field where he charged the King Tiger. It was at this point he found the tanks were still there, of course the King Tiger being disabled. Now there's also some reports that differ here. Either he fired on the King Tiger and finished off the giant tank, or he targeted the Tiger I first, put a few shots downrange and knocked it out, and then finished off the Tiger II. Either way, he did finish the King Tiger, and the other German tank started to return fire and he fell back. Quite a wild story, but for his bravery and his initiative, Lieutenant Gorman would receive the Military Cross. He would also receive at least one other major award later in the war, but that's a story for another time. I hope that you've enjoyed this story. It's quite a wild one, quite an interesting one, and this little short episode to bring you this little cool and interesting snippet from history. If you like what you see with the Kentuckian, why don't you hit that like button and subscribe? It makes a real big difference. And don't forget about our Patreon if you'd like to support me in a more personal way. Anyway, thank you all for listening, and remember, friends, as long as you and I are doing what's right, we make a real difference in this old world. Been Ryan Dalton of the Kentuckian, signing off.